The first thing Christian Horner ever told Sergio Perez was that Red Bull did not really want him. 2 cars, because the rules forced them to run 2. 1 driver, because that is who the whole team is built around. Perez just repeated that conversation out loud, word for word, and the timing could not be worse. Red Bull is sinking. Max Verstappen is one bad weekend from walking away. And the man who sat in that second car for 4 years is finally saying what that seat actually cost him. This is the confession Red Bull hoped he would never make, and it arrives days before Spa. How does a driver go from Red Bull's second seat to the one man calmly explaining how the whole thing works from the inside? Perez does not raise his voice when he says it. He describes that first meeting with Horner like a man reading a receipt. Red Bull runs 2 cars because the regulations demand 2 cars. If the team could win a championship with one, it would be happy to. Everything is for Max, around Max, aimed at Max. That is the arrangement Perez signs. Not a partnership, a support role, written into the very first handshake before he has turned a single lap in the car. For 4 years, he did not say any of this. He answered the questions, took the criticism, and kept climbing into that second car. The version the sport remembers is a driver who faded, who could not handle the pressure, who was lucky to last as long as he did. That version was never really challenged, because the only person who could challenge it was still inside the building, still needing the team, still saying nothing. Now he is out, at a new team, with nothing left to protect. And the silence is over. Perez says the part people miss is that the machine never even hides it. Every upgrade that arrives, every senior engineer, every experienced hand in the Red Bull garage flows in one direction. He is the second car, so he gets what is left over. He is careful about how he frames it. He does not claim Verstappen was handed some cartoon advantage. He says something more precise and more damaging. While Verstappen has every opportunity, every senior engineer, every experienced pair of hands in the building, the second driver works with whatever is left after that. The talent goes to Max, so does the experience, and the attention, and the benefit of every doubt. And you cannot beat a driver as good as Verstappen while starting every single weekend a step behind him on the very people who build and tune the car. He says facing Max Verstappen anywhere in Formula 1 is one of the hardest jobs in the sport. But facing Max Verstappen inside Max's own team, surrounded by Max's own people, is a different thing entirely. You need the best of the best in every area just to survive, and Perez says the second driver simply does not get that. The best of everything is already spoken for. And then he says the line that has been traveling all week. Being Max's teammate at Red Bull, he says, is the worst job in the whole of Formula 1, by far. Not one of the hardest, the worst. Sit with how strange that is. Perez is describing the fastest, most dominant team of the entire era, a team that won everything in sight. And the man who drove for them is calling that seat the worst job on the grid. The best team in the sport, and the worst job in the sport, at the very same time, in the very same garage. That contradiction is the whole story. There is a second half to that line that cuts even deeper. Perez says that only once he left, and Red Bull went out and brought in every other driver they could find, did the team finally understand the job he had been doing for 4 straight years. He over-delivered, he says. He held down that second car through a period of total dominance, and it took the sight of everyone who came after him struggling in the exact same seat for anyone to notice. Every driver who has followed him into that car has been chewed up, and each one that quietly fails proves the point he has been making all along. It was never only about the driver, it was about the seat. Look at what has happened to that seat since. The driver first brought in to replace him was pulled from it fast. The one who followed was dropped from Red Bull entirely before this season even began, demoted to a reserve role. Now a rookie holds it. 3 names in barely a year, in the exact seat Perez held down for 4. Red Bull did not just lose a driver that December, they lost the only person who had figured out how to survive the thing. But the real question is what happens behind closed doors, in the parts nobody films. And earlier this year, in a separate conversation, Perez told a story that stops people cold. When he first arrives at Red Bull and the results do not come as fast as everyone wants, the message he gets is not about the car, it is about him. They tell him that what he needs is a psychologist, that his head is the problem, so he goes and sees one. And then a bill lands at the Red Bull factory. £6,000. For a single phone call. According to Perez, the instruction he is given is to forward the bill straight to Helmut Marko, because Marko is the one who will pay it. £6,000 for one call, to fix a problem that Perez says was never really his to begin with. A team that measured every gram on the car, every thousandth of a second in the pit stop, and somehow that number still got signed off without anyone blinking. Think about what that story actually says. When Perez struggled, the first assumption inside Red Bull was not that the second car was compromised, it was that the second driver was mentally weak. The car was never questioned. The setup was never questioned. The driver's mind was the thing they went after first. Now that is Perez's own account of what happened, told his way, and Red Bull has not stood up to answer it. Their silence is not proof, but it is not a denial either. Perez says he felt supported, but only to a point. Past that line, nobody was willing to go any further. Horner would be glad if he won a race, Marco would be glad, but the moment it truly mattered, the answer never changed. The whole project belongs to one driver, and that driver is Max. Perez says the only reason he survives 4 years in that seat is the character he built long before he ever arrived. Push that system too hard, he says, and it simply breaks you. And for most of those 4 years, he says, he is completely on his own inside Red Bull. And Perez says the cost of all of it did not stop when he climbed out of the car for the last time. He says that when he finally left, he had to take a full year away from the sport, because mentally he was completely drained. His last 6 months there, he says, were brutal even for a man who thinks of himself as mentally very strong. He reaches for one word in particular, and it has traveled further than any other. He calls that final stretch toxic. He says he simply wanted a break, badly, from all of it. That is his own account of his own state of mind, not something anyone else has confirmed. But it lines up perfectly with a driver who ran second in the world 1 year and disappeared from the grid entirely the next. That sounds like a small thing. One driver, feeling alone inside a big, successful team. It was not a small thing at all. It was the whole design, working exactly the way it was meant to. The same second seat that once made Perez look small is the seat that is now swallowing everyone who touches it. But before that, here is the record the drama tends to skip straight past, because it does not fit the story of a man who could not cut it. In 2023, Sergio Perez finishes second in the entire World Championship. Second. He hands Red Bull the first 1-2 finish in the drivers' standings in the team's history. 2 wins that year, 9 podiums, the strongest season of his life. He is, by the raw numbers, one of the best 2 drivers on the planet that year. Across his career, he takes 6 wins, 3 pole positions, and 39 podiums. This is not a passenger, this is a proven Grand Prix winner. Then 2024 arrives, and the form falls off a cliff. 4 podiums in the opening rounds, and then almost nothing for the rest of the year. Retirements, spins, weekends where he cannot climb out of the midfield. And by December, he is gone. Red Bull terminates the contract and moves on to the next name on the list. The man who ran second in the world is discarded inside a single year. And at the time, almost everyone agrees that he deserves it. That is the story the public knew. Behind the scenes, Perez says, the picture was never anywhere near that simple, because the collapse of the second driver and the collapse of the whole team turn out to be the same story told twice. Look at Red Bull right now, the exact moment Perez is saying all of this. The team that spent a decade crushing the field sits 4th in the Constructors' Championship. 4th. Ahead of them sit the teams Red Bull used to humiliate. A Mercedes pairing running 1 and 2 in the drivers' standings. A Ferrari that has found its feet again. A McLaren that has turned into the team everyone on the grid wants to drive for. And Red Bull, the reference point of the entire era, is now looking up at all of them. Their champion, Max Verstappen, sits 7th in the drivers' standings after 9 rounds. 78 points behind the man in second, with only 50 points left on the table before the summer break. 7th, the most complete driver of his generation, marooned in 7th. This is the first season Red Bull builds its own engine in-house, and the thing is heavy and unreliable. Verstappen describes the car as incredibly tough to drive, a machine where every single lap is a fight. The team principal has admitted Red Bull has been as much as a full second off the leaders, and Verstappen has already retired from races this year with parts failing underneath him, including a rear wing letting go at the British Grand Prix, and there is a cruel twist buried in the current standings. The driver in the other Red Bull this season, a young rookie promoted from the junior team, has at times been out-qualifying Verstappen himself. For years the story was that the second seat was cursed, that anyone parked next to Verstappen would look slow, that this was simply the natural order of things. Now a newcomer is matching him and beating him on a Saturday, in the same difficult car, while Verstappen wrestles it. Which raises the exact question Red Bull spent years refusing to ask. How much of the gap in that second car was ever really about the drivers at all? And Verstappen is not hiding his frustration anymore. Every weekend the questions come about his future, and every weekend he refuses to shut the door on leaving. A driver who once insisted he would finish his entire career at Red Bull is suddenly very careful never to promise that again. Here is the detail that explains everything Perez has been saying. A machine built entirely around one driver only works while that one driver is winning. The moment he is not, there is nothing else there. No balance, no second pillar, no backup plan. Just one man, one car, and a whole structure that forgot how to function without him at the front. And the man who first told Perez that Red Bull only wanted one driver is not even there to run it anymore. Christian Horner is out. 20 years at Red Bull, the only team principal the team had ever known, removed from his role and gone. He leaves with a settlement reported at around £75 million, walking away from the empire he built. Before him went Adrian Newey, the designer behind the championship-winning cars, off to Aston Martin. Then went Jonathan Wheatley, the sporting director who ran the operation on a Sunday, off to Audi. One by one, the people who actually made Red Bull untouchable walked out the door. What is left is a team built completely around one man. At the exact moment, that man is slower and more frustrated than he has ever been in his life. The design that won 4 titles is now the design that has nothing to fall back on. Every warning buried inside Perez's story is playing out in real time, on live television, week after week. If you follow the sport this closely, subscribe to the channel. This is where the whole grid gets tracked, every single week, all season long. Now stay with this, because a man who actually ran a Formula 1 team just looked at Perez's words and backed every one of them up. While Perez was being painted as the weak link, a man who spent years running teams in this exact paddock was watching the same thing Perez describes, and quietly reaching the same conclusion. His name is Otmar Szafnauer. To understand why his backing carries weight, you have to know the history. Years ago, at a smaller team, Szafnauer signed Perez and built a genuinely competitive car around him. He rated the Mexican so highly that, by his own telling, he practically threw a party the day the deal was done. He is not a Perez loyalist inventing excuses. He is a team boss who got the best out of Perez, now looking at a team that got the worst. When Perez's confession lands, Szafnauer does not dismiss it. He says starting a partnership by telling a driver the team only really wants one car is a brutal way to begin a working relationship. And then he explains the machine, and this is the part that matters most. When 2 drivers hand a team different feedback, and their driving styles pull in different directions, the team cannot chase both at once, so it listens to the faster one, the one leading the championship. The car drifts toward that driver's taste, then toward his strengths, and slowly the second driver is racing a car that was built for another man's hands entirely. Szafnauer says that is not cruelty. It just happens, naturally, on its own. Which is almost worse, because it means nobody inside Red Bull ever has to make the decision to bury the second driver. The system does it for them, quietly, upgrade by upgrade, until the gap looks like the second driver simply is not good enough. And once that gap exists, it feeds itself. The second driver looks slower, so he gets less. Getting less, he goes slower still, so he gets less again. It is a spiral with only one direction, and from the outside it looks exactly like a driver who cannot cut it. Perez spent 4 years inside that spiral. He is telling you now that the spiral was the design, not the accident. And this next part is the one even Red Bull's own supporters have struggled to answer. Szafnauer goes further than sympathy. He says that if Red Bull had simply kept Perez in that second car last year, Max Verstappen would be a world champion right now. Because Verstappen loses the 2025 title by 2 points. 2 points. The closest championship margin the sport has seen under the current scoring system. And Szafnauer's argument is simple and hard to break. A functioning second driver, taking points off the rivals just a handful of times across a whole season, is worth far, far more than 2 points. Red Bull threw that away. They decided the second car did not really matter. They let it sit empty of a proven winner, and then they lost the championship by the exact kind of margin that a strong second car exists to protect. Put it in the plainest terms. The seat Perez says they never respected is the seat that would have won them the title. The thing they treated as disposable is the thing that would have kept the crown on Verstappen's head. Everything Red Bull built to serve one driver is now working directly against them. Because that one driver is standing at the door with his hand on the handle. Verstappen's contract with Red Bull runs all the way to 2028. But there is a clause buried inside it. If he sits outside the top 2 in the championship at the summer break, he is free to leave at the end of this year. After the British Grand Prix, stuck in 7th, that clause is live for the very first time. It is no longer a theory on paper, it is real, and it is sitting right there, waiting to be used. Reports say Verstappen is deep in talks that could carry him to McLaren for next season. McLaren, the team currently ahead of Red Bull, the team that already hired away Verstappen's own race engineer earlier this year, the voice that guided him through 4 championships, the man who read him the strategy through every title-deciding lap. Signing that voice was the moment the paddock started treating McLaren, and not Mercedes, as the favourite to land him. A move like that would almost certainly force out one of McLaren's current drivers, most likely the young Australian who has been fighting at the front all year. Nothing is signed. His management insists they have never once actually pulled an exit clause in all their years together. But they also confirm the clauses exist, and always have. That is not a denial. That is a door being left wide open, and there is a timing detail that matters. The clause may sit live now on the standings, but the window to actually trigger it does not open until later in the autumn, which means the summer, and Spa, and everything that happens next, is Verstappen quietly gathering the evidence he needs to make the biggest decision of his career. Everything is now in place for Red Bull to lose the one driver they built the entire team around. They may simply not understand yet what all of it was building toward. A team designed for a single man, about to discover exactly what it looks like when that man decides he has finally had enough. Which brings all of it to Spa. The team principal who replaced Horner has already called Red Bull a distant force this season. And Spa is one of the circuits that punishes a heavy, energy-hungry car the hardest. Long straights, high top speeds, huge demands on the engine, nowhere at all to hide a weakness. Everything the current Red Bull is bad at, Spa asks for all at once. Meanwhile, Sergio Perez is somewhere else entirely. He is at Cadillac now, driving for Formula One's newest team in its very first season. He is running ahead of Valtteri Bottas, a driver quick enough to have won Grands Prix and finished second in a world championship of his own. Between the two of them, they bring more than 500 Grand Prix starts, 16 wins, and over 100 podiums to a brand new outfit. Perez sat out an entire year, took the break he says he badly needed, and came back looking lighter and freer than he had in a very long time. The second driver Red Bull discarded is racing without the weight now. The team that discarded him is heading into a weekend that could expose their car all over again, in front of everyone. And for the first time in years, the story around Perez is not about weakness. It is about a driver who was right. Right about the seat, right about the machine, right about what it quietly does to whoever ends up in the second car. He does not even have to say it out loud anymore. The standings are saying it for him every Sunday. Step back, and the shape of it is almost unbearable for Red Bull. For 4 years, the second driver told a quiet story about a team that only knew how to build for one man. For 4 years, that story was easy to wave away as the excuse of a driver who could not keep up. Then they removed the second driver, kept only the one man, and lost the championship by 2 points. Then the people who built the winning cars walked out. Then the one man they kept slid all the way to 7th. Every single thing Perez described has come true, in order, on schedule. He did not need to be proven right. Red Bull is proving it for him, race by race. Christian Horner once told Sergio Perez that Red Bull only ran 2 cars because the rules forced them to, that the whole thing was built for one man, and one man only. For years, that sounded like pure confidence. The swagger of a team that could afford to treat the second seat as an afterthought, because the first seat was winning everything in sight. Now the second car is empty of a proven winner. The man who ran the team for 20 years is gone, the designer is gone, the sporting director is gone, and the one man it was all built around sits 7th in a car he cannot tame, with his hand on an exit clause that finally works. Perez did not expose Red Bull. He did something quieter and far more damaging. He simply described, in flat and unhurried detail, exactly how the machine was designed to work. And now everyone gets to watch what happens to that machine when the one driver it was built for stops winning. The only real question left before Spa is whether Max Verstappen has already reached the same conclusion Sergio Perez reached years ago, that this team was only ever built for one result, and that when the winning stops, there is nothing underneath it, nothing holding the whole thing up, and a very long way down.